little bit of closing. We have all the speakers are done, but we we saw how what essentially is with the convergence of storage and memory, how much more memory-like capability our machines are going to have. And it reminds me, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or so, Andy Grove was on stage with the founders of Google. I think it was Larry Page. I can't remember which one. Nathan probably remembers. But the, at the end of this time, Google, by the way, was not a household name, and in fact, it wasn't a verb yet. Andy concluded by saying, what could Intel do for you? And the reply was, we need much more memory. He says, we need to put the entire internet in RAM. And 5,000 people just bust out laughing when this happened, right? And he described how it wasn't that hard. Not necessarily the whole internet, but 90% of the stuff that matters. And it was interesting. I mean, yes, the internet's got bigger since then. And we're still not going to put the entire internet into RAM, but it's amazing transformation that's going on. So what do we do? This is Jim's 90-second summary of today. We started off, I tried to make it into human terms, the human computer, the heartbeat, all that stuff. Rick Colson came in and he talked about how using 3D crosspoint, we could get a 7.32 performance improvement over NAND-based SSDs. Even though the media is 1,000 times faster, we could see a 7.32. And even if the media was 0, we'd get about 8. So that came in. Nathan Miller from US Santa Cruz came in and talked about all the new stuff we need to do for testing. He says NVM needs new benchmarks, couldn't agree more. And he talked about all the different types of aspects, compression and dedupe and all this stuff. And then he finally came over and said that what we really need to know, and nobody knows this, is what's the workload for NVM. Ken Gibson came in next, and Ken went over that memory is the new storage. He talked about the NVM libraries and how that's really going to scale out. For most data centers, NVM over storage is going to make that scale out. Jim Handy and Tom Coughlin came in next. They quickly went over, they took a view of actually, which I thought was pretty cool, which is, where'd it go? Oh, he talked about memory hierarchies, but really talked about the touch rate versus response time and had a lot of discussion in that regard. Matt Bryson came in, he had a panel on what are these various other new technologies that are coming out. And they talked about a bunch of them, MRAM, spin torque, SEM, CP RAM, et cetera, eFlash. And they went through Q&A basically on how these things are going to be adopted. And at the end, there was a little feel-good Intel bashing, and so it's all in good spirit. And then we had our lunchtime keynote. Edward Sharp came in and really talked about some critical innovations that we're already doing. He used the examples of NVM Express was one, persistent memory, that work that we're doing in the Twig, 100 gigabit Ethernet and RDMA, that kind of wraps into what we were talking about at the end here. But really talked about applications are king. If there was one takeaway, applications are king, and we need to figure out what are the new applications that are going to take advantage of this, because those are what are going to drive the application of this technology. Don Jeanette and John Chen came in and reminded us how tough it is to do technology shifts. Talked a lot about migrating from SAS and SATA over to PCIe. They did talk about that. Now we're over 100,000 drives per quarter, so it's a nice little milestone. I think it was 107 or 117, I forget. But that was good. But talked about the pitfalls and the procurement hurdles that are need to overcome, and talked about how hyperscale could be a path there, but really emphasized bringing us down to reality of what does it really take to change these technologies. Dehan talking about the HGST example that using phase change memory. He showed how you could get, using these phase change SSDs over persistent memory, they got about a 10x performance improvement, which was pretty close to what Rick Colson said, about 7.3 to 8, performance improvement. So we got some validation of data across more than one keynote speaker. The NVDIM panel came in, and Arthur brilliantly created a power outage on this section of San Jose, and then restored power just before it came back, so he could demonstrate that those NVDIMs out in the showcase were able to save away the data and restore it. I'm not sure, I'm pleased that he shut off the power for the city, but you've got to do what you have to do to have a good demo, right? Neil came on board and really talked about what Microsoft is doing to support the programming model. He talked a lot about the zero copy access and Microsoft's commitment to that. Obviously, a big thing. Without that, this whole programming model would be stillborn. He talked about his SCM driver model, SCM disk drivers. And he talked about how the file system basically translates stuff over to persistent memory. He talked about in the Microsoft operating system how block mode will be very compatible, how the DAS mode will be mostly compatible, and that was pretty reassuring. And finally, Jeff Moyer came up, and it was almost like they swapped badges. We had Microsoft and the Linux community saying very, very similar things, which I think gave credence to the fact that taking this approach of having this programming model so that we get across the industry, across multiple operating environments, commonality seems to be paying off. I mean, we'll be done when it's done, but the indicators are looking positive. Is that a safe way of saying it? Christian came in and talked about his Hecton SQL in-memory database. Kevin just did that. He was using it 64% faster on some of he had these log files, and he looked at some examples I wrote down were 64% faster. He also showed how using a hard drive plus just a tiny little bit of persistent memory, I took that's probably what would be in the NVDIM kind of capacities, how that actually outperformed an SSD. So that was actually really interesting. Feedback. We tried to ask him when this would be available in their SQL server, and he didn't give any data. So it was almost like he was from the 3D Crosspoint team. You have to make fun of yourself sometimes, Tom Tapley just came up and was a straight man for basically Talpy stood up and talked about a very, very compelling need of why, in order for this to be really useful, how this needs to be not captive to one box, but be able to be shared at the fabric level. Came with great examples. He talked about the remote access and ultra low latency were the two overarching driving factors, and latency. It's all about writes. So reads don't matter, writes matter a lot. And he talked about how these writes amplify, every time you do a write, how much it amplifies and why that's the critical path for this. And that data needs to be safely off the box. And then Kevin Deerling came in, and you just saw what he did, so I'm not going to repeat that. So I don't know if I hit my 90 seconds or not, but I think that was the conference at a glance. So anyway, I'd like to thank all of you hardcore people who stuck through it to the end. I think this was a remarkable day. This room holds about 250. We had 607 people pre-registered. Not all of them, of course, showed up. But it was a very full room. We had an overflow room, and during the peak part of the conference, there was there's fairly busy up in the overflow room as well. So I take this as an industry endorsement that the work that we're doing is solid, and there's a lot of interest in it. So I'd like to personally thank you all for being part of this, and remind you that this NVM programming twig is open for all. And if any of you who think that you need to get engaged, maybe you're sitting there and realizing that maybe your company doesn't have a solid strategy and you need to develop one. So maybe maybe you're excited by what's coming, maybe you're fearful of what's coming, but this is open. You could join this, you could participate, and so there's an open invitation. So with that, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you had a great day.